right. I'm not quite sure what was going on with it. Something happened and it wasn't allowing, something wasn't working. It just wasn't working. And I don't know what it was, but whatever. How you guys doing? My name is Steve. This show is called The Rational American. And today we're going to be talking about trucking. And I kind of feel like we have to because I saw so many different things today, posted online. Mainstream media is talking heavily about this railroad shutdown and, that truckers are going to have to pick up the slack and then everything that's going on with truckers along the road. And I know a lot of my viewers don't really have a big idea on, about the trucking industry. So I figured I would talk a little bit about it. But first, as always, I encourage all of you guys to go over to theangryturnip.com. That is our website. That's where we have all sorts of clothes. We're running a Black Friday sale, which you could see here if I did this right. Yeah, look at that. Look, high-tech shit. But yeah, you can check it out. This video is not the right video because, everything got screwed up already. But you can see all the hats that we have on there. We're obviously a pretty pro Second Amendment, pro America type of organization if you're just tuning in. But yeah, so let me answer a question. Tommy Summers asks, what do I think is the best looking truck out there? Well, I guess new truck that's out there. I like personally, I watched the whole video. I forgot what outlet. I think it was Commerce Journal or whatever, Journal of Commerce, that did a walkthrough of a Peterbilt 579, a 2023 Peterbilt 579. That was a nice truck. And I the video doesn't have a lot of views, and I thought about sharing it out, and then I said, nah, screw it, because I don't agree with a lot of the takes that they have on the freight industry. But that is a beautiful truck. So let's talk about the trucking industry. And I'll just give a brief rundown. So if you don't have any knowledge whatsoever of the trucking industry, I'll feed it to you. Okay. I was a freight broker and worked in logistics for approximately 15 years. I still am an agent for someone, although I haven't moved freight in over a year or two, now. So I haven't moved any freight in a long time, but I'm still very connected to the truck industry. I started my live streaming career, or, my switch from being an executive with freight brokerages to, the media side of things, running a show called Freight Broker Live, where I just talked about the freight industry daily. That was my job. And we wrote about it. And we were one of the, I would say we were one of the go-tos for everything related to truck news. And then we switched over to the political spectrum, and I hate it. And so I'm going to be talking a lot more about freight in the future. But so that gives a little bit about my background. I have a lot of knowledge in the industry, and truthfully, I just love the industry. I love hearing about it. I like watching videos of trucks. I watch all these videos, and I tell you what, and I was telling my wife the other day, I said, we have 11 years. And she's like, 11 years for what? And I said, till the youngest is out of the house, and then we can go buy a truck and drive cross country. And she's like, what are you talking about? Because that's my dream. It's not her dream, would be to sell our house, buy a big, a big truck and just go travel around the country and sightsee and stuff like that. But yeah, it's kind of interesting because the freight industry in all the time that I've worked in it, granted you have technology and stuff that's changed the industry a little bit, but a lot of the things are still the same. Driver pay is still a struggling issue with carriers and independent owner operators. There's no real advocacy for independent truck drivers. And again, when I focus on news related to the trucking industry, I don't necessarily focus on things that benefit big carriers or things that benefit the big mega fleets, because they're the ones that dictate the market as it is right now. Those guys are the ones that are in control of rising fuel costs, or not. They're not in control of that, but they're in control of what you hear about trucking. Because, if they get upset about something, it makes national news. If, 1,000 independent owner operators are getting screwed over by brokers or getting screwed over by, way stations, or getting trespassed from Walmart distribution centers, we'll talk about that, then there's nobody out there. They don't have anybody that has their back. Nobody is actually advocating for the benefit of the truck driver. Now, there are YouTubers and stuff, but they're limited in what they can do except try to bring awareness to it. And that's been an issue for a long time. That's been an issue within the trucking industry for years and years and years. And I don't suspect it's going to change anytime soon because, well, truckers especially independent truckers, they can't come together. they can't work together. They're just not able to do so. You know what I mean? And because it's like, for example, let's take this trucker protest. Remember, it, it was, I guess, being led by this guy named Rick Santiago. For anyone that doesn't know, he's been a talking head within owner operators and freight brokers and blah 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 for so long, for years and years. He was in when I was doing the Freight Broker Live thing. He was leading this, or said to be leading this protest that was taking place in Washington, D.C., on Constitution Ave, where, it was a couple hundred trucks. They had probably the biggest turnout with a freight protest ever that I remember. And they all parked along Constitution Ave when Trump was in office, and they all would honk their horns nonstop, day by day. Mark Meadows came out and gave everyone M&Ms, and they're super happy, and a couple of haps, and all the truckers were like, yeah, they're fucking listening to us. And they didn't listen at all. None of the things that they pushed for were actually understood. And rightfully so, because you had a bunch of people that went in to represent the truckers that were just giving outlandish stuff. They had no idea, what it was like to be in the industry, or they weren't representing any of the issues. Half of the truckers that were set up on Constitution Avenue believe that freight brokers were price gouging, and that's the reason why rates were so low, because they don't have an understanding of the actual freight market. While the other half of the truck drivers were out there for valid reasons. They were out there, because they were protesting the fact that fuel, it wasn't even that high at that point, but rates were stupid low, kind of what they are now. And what I'm going to go into it in grave detail. So if you don't like trucking, you probably don't want to watch this, but I think someone needs to talk about what's going on in the trucking industry, especially now that everyone is advocating for trucks only because they're worried about the railroad shutting down. Where was that support 2 months ago, or 3 months ago, or 2 years ago, or 5 years ago? It's always been the same thing. So Rick Santiago is a guy that apparently he was a truck driver. He's got a long history. Like, you can Google him. He's got a long history of just being weird, and that's just my opinion. And I've talked to the guy on the phone. I've talked to him in person. I literally got in my car from Florida, drove all the way up to DC to confront him because I feel like he's a fraud, but whatever. And I did that on live when I was live streaming in DC. I was so freaking pissed that day. But I had a good reception from all the truck drivers because I was not viewed as a freight broker, although I was viewed as someone that cares truly about the industry. So anyway, Rick Santiago has been a figurehead in these trucking protests. He always seems to appear. He disappears for a while, and then whenever there's something to gripe about, or something that he thinks he can gripe about, he will come out and he will start doing it. And he was recently in the news, if you want to say. He went viral on social media because he was talking about this big trucker protest. They were going to protest the Carmack agreement. They were going to protest diesel prices. They were going to protest the low fuel rate. And they had 400 trucks that were going to line up outside of Fox News in New York City, and starting at 5 o'clock in the morning. And all their trucks are going to be heard on Fox and Friends in the morning. And it's going to be the biggest thing. And nobody actually showed up. Just like always. I knew it. I got so many emails from people, and they're like, hey, what about this big trucker protest? There's going to be hundreds of trucks, 400 trucks are signed up to do this. I know Mother Trucker is a YouTube channel. Really nice guy. I know he made a video with it, and then he gave he made another video, and he's like, yeah, it never happened because they only got 4 trucks, and he was really dismayed by it. And I'm like, dude, it's because where were you 2 years ago? I know he's been doing it for a long time. 2 years ago, you would have learned that Rick Santiago doesn't speak for the trucking industry, but then again, nobody does. So you got to say he's trying, right? Anyway, so that never happened. And that's the thing about, freight protests. Protests are evolving around freight. There's been these groups of truck drivers, outlaw truckers, whatever you want to call them, that end up doing these protests. The Disrespected Trucker, Jeremy, that runs the Disrespected Trucker, I think he still does. He was one that was very big in setting up these protests, for advocating for the benefit of truckers. Mike Landis, you know him from the COVID People's Convoy thing. He was out there on the front lines. Even in the May Day protest in 2020 outside of Constitution Avenue, he was there with his truck. He was actually one of the people that went in and met with Mark Meadows and Ray Martinez, who at that point was the acting FMCSA director. And I don't even know who it is now. Some lady that has no business in trucking because she doesn't understand the industry. And that's the thing too. You can't advocate for change in the industry if you don't have a complete and utter understanding of the industry. You can't advocate for change in the trucking industry unless you know all aspects of the trucking industry. You could be you could be a driver and have all the or independent owner operator and feel like you know everything. The first second that you say freight brokers are price gouging and that's why rates are low, everything you say after that is completely bullshit because freight brokers aren't price gouging for the most part. Maybe you got an off the wall one that is making more money than they should, but the majority of freight brokers aren't doing it. It's the market rates are down, and I'll show you why that is happening. Even though fuel rates are through the roof, because right now you got hundreds and hundreds of truck drivers that have parked their trucks for months now because rates have been really low. There's a 75% reduction in freight volumes over a year ago, and we are in peak season. Like these numbers, which is surprising because you would think a lot of people in the freight industry would be like flipping out about it, right? You know, a lot of the talking heads, a lot of the big news organizations would be like, oh, yo, pay attention. The freight industry is going to implode. And granted, some like Craig Fuller with Freight Waves and some other people are talking about it. And like Fuller, he's been talking about it forever. And it seems like he's been on CNBC and all these other channels talking about it and nobody actually freaking listens, even though he's such a smart fella. Anyway, so there's always these trucking protests. Everybody always tries to hold these protests. Black Smoke Matters was one. For truckers, they can't do what like BLM and the BLM protests, let's just call them whatever, where they would block interstates in 2020. Many of you guys that especially have been following since the freight broker days, you remember I think it was back in April of 2020. I wrote an article on Freight Broker Live, which the website's not out there anymore. This article's gone. But I wrote an article about a group of truckers, several hundred truckers that all pulled down to the breakdown lane I forgot what interstate it was, but it was in Houston, Texas. They didn't block the roadways. They didn't do a slow roll where they drive at the minimum speed limit permissible in order to avoid tickets, but it still snarls traffic. They didn't do any of that. What they did is they pulled off. They weren't even on the breakdown lane. They were like off the breakdown lane. Clearly, they weren't impeding traffic at all. So what's kind of funny about it is the Houston police, the response that they gave to this thing, they ended up blocking down the entire highway, telling all these trucks to go in a parking lot, and they gave them all misdemeanor citations, which is absolutely insane. They were protesting. They were more port workers in the Houston ports. They were more concerned about cross-border rates and intermodal rates coming out of the ports. That's what they were really concerned about. A lot of them were Spanish-speaking truck drivers, and that's what they did. And they all got misdemeanor citations. And then 2 months later, on the very same roadway, almost in the same exact spot that all these truckers went down to the breakdown lane, the interstate was shut down when BLM protesters shut down the highway. And the chief of police at that time, who I now believe, I think it's not Villanova, it's the guy that's running Los Angeles. I forgot what his name is. He took a knee with BLM on the same street where just months before he cited all those drivers with misdemeanor charges, which is just absolutely nutty, right? And so truckers are always like, we don't get the benefit of the doubt, which is true. They don't. Not every, look around your house right now. And I say this all the time, but do it. Look around your house right now, or wherever you are, your truck, wherever you are, and you're watching this right now. Every single item that you have in front of you, your TV, the furniture, every single item that is in your house at one point in its supply chain life, hit the back of a truck. Everybody always forgets about that. And I like to point it out because it's true. There's not a single thing that's in this office, not a single thing in the warehouse behind, not a single thing in this office next door. Nothing didn't hit the back of a truck at some point, whether it was FedEx, whether it was, at some point it hit the back of the truck, which is kind of interesting when you think about it that way. And then, because then you would say, well, you know what? We have to pay attention to truck drivers, right? Because obviously everything we have goes on the backs of trucks. But nobody does. Nobody ever thinks of it, and it's weird because a lot of the same issues, a lot of the issues in trucking have been the same issues for a long time. Granted, there's this news organization called the ATRI. So it's the research arm of the American Trucking Association. They do this survey, which they call the 10 most critical, issues in trucking, 10 critical issues in trucking. and they survey fleets, and then they survey drivers and owner operators. Granted, they don't have a lot of owner operator respondents, so they're most likely they're asking drivers. And always for the past like 10 years, that's an embellishment. Let's say the past 3 years, the number one issue in trucking has always been, anyone know what it was? Always in the past, let's say 10 issues in trucking. What is the number one issue? It still is too, I believe. Which is, it's crazy. It's crazy. For 2022, fleets, they say the driver shortage. Big fleets, they all say the driver shortage is the biggest issue. The 2022, they've switched it because this is weird because Transport Dive kind of dives into it different. I got to look up the actual ATRI report. Let me see. Oh, so they switched. So for the first time in years, it's not driver shortage anymore. Now it's fuel costs. The rising fuel costs are the biggest issue in trucking, which is kind of crazy. And I can show you what I'm looking at right here. This is an article from Transport Dive, but ATRI, ATRI, which is the Association Transport Research Institute or some shit like that. They do this, the top 3 issue for motor carriers and drivers, including operators, according to the reports. And if you look at it, the 2002 rank was fuel prices. Fuel prices weren't even in 2021. They weren't even an issue in 2021. Driver shortage is now number 2, secondary to fuel prices. Last year and the year before and the year before that was number 1. Truck parking. But this is where it's important, because if you go down and you look at the top issues for motor carriers and commercial truck drivers, they still say driver shortage is an issue. How can big fleets say there's an issue with driver shortage when, if you go over to the trucking industry trends, look at van to load. So this says van to load, load to truck. This means for every truck, there are this many loads, right? So if you look at October 22 versus October 21, it's down 47%. 47 spot rates over, versus last year are down 15%. Flatbed load to truck rates, they're down 74.4%. So that means last year there was 74% more freight on the roadway than there is this year. And they're saying driver shortage. Do you know what happens if they keep adding these cheap truckers? And look, even reefer is down 57.5% over last year. If they keep adding it, like there's this weird, I believe that the big trucks that all push out this, or the big trucking companies or the big mega fleets that push out the driver shortage narrative that you hear so many times on Fox News because they're stupid and they don't want to have anyone that actually understands the trucking issue or the trucking industry. The reason why they keep pushing out the driver shortage thing is because the more drivers they get on their payroll, the more owner operators are forced to get off of the road, right? Because if you already have a 75% deficit in flatbed freight, obviously, if you add more commercial fleet drivers where the operation costs are lower, then they're going to be able to keep the costs down. And therefore, all of the independent owner operators that aren't getting discounts for buying 100 trucks, that aren't getting discounts on their fuel, that aren't self-insured, because all these big mega fleets are all self-insured. They have the money. They make the money. They can self-insure all their trucks. They can keep the prices down by putting more people down or by putting more drivers in the seat. They can keep the rates the drivers pay lower because, right now what they do is they compete. And this happened in 2018. Same thing happened. They pumped out driver shortage. And they added, and they heavily advertised and paid all these, recruiting awards and sign-on bonuses and everything to put drivers behind the wheel. And then all the freight dried up and all these big trucking companies laid off all their employees and had, trucks sitting dormant. Many trucking companies actually went belly up. One of the best well-known trucking companies that went bankrupt was Celadon. Many people know that. They stranded all their truck drivers all across the country. And people don't realize that, because if it doesn't affect you every single day, it doesn't affect you. You know what I mean? It's like if you don't see it, you don't care about it. It's not, do you know what I mean? And it's crazy when so many people rely on trucks that so many people are, I was driving one time with my mom, right? And she knows that I've worked in the transportation industry for years. And I was driving in a car with her, and we were talking about trucking. We're talking about transportation. We're passing trucks on the road. And I'm like, there's a 75% chance that the trucks that we're passing on the interstates right now, that if you look at that company name, they got less than 10 trucks. If you search them by US DOT number, you'll see they have less than 10 trucks. That person that's driving the truck, even some of the big mega fleets, though that person is their own boss, they're driving. Their success is completely contingent on the market allowing them to succeed. You know what I mean? And that's the truth. And truck drivers, they don't get any like appropriate recognition. You know what I mean? Everyone's like, oh, thank a truck driver. That's what everyone said. That's why, to me, when I saw the People's Convoy going, that's why a lot of people were like, what the fuck? Why is Steve not supporting the People's Convoy? You know, he's a big freedom guy. Why isn't he talking about, why isn't he like supporting what they're doing? It's because I felt like, for me, what they were doing was not what they should have been doing, because they finally had national attention, worldwide attention, talking about the trucking industry. And the only thing they talked about was lockdowns and this and that, which didn't heavily affect the trucking industry. Sure, it did in 2020 when we first locked down, but then the trucking industry started coming back, and truckers were exempt from all that shit. But here's a good thing to look at. If you pay attention to the trucking industry, when everything locked down in 2020, the one thing that happened, that happens pretty much every natural disaster across the United States, is that the truckers all became essential. Now, what's that mean? They have this thing called hours of service regulations, right? So they are mandated by the government not to exceed 14 hours on duty. If they exceed 14 hours on duty, they're put in an out of service violation, and they have to do a reset for 10 hours on the road. They keep electronic logs, which a lot of people hate. I don't have a problem with electronic logs, because what they do is they keep you legal, because you have these hours of service. Like, you can only have 8 hours on duty. You got to be off for half an hour, and then you can drive for more, blah, 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 blah. And it just keeps going on. And you got to do, I think it's a half an hour reset now. It could be more. I have no idea. But, 15-minute for pre-trip, all this shit that you got to do. And you keep a log, like an actual, like it used to be a paper log. And I'm part of the reason why people have ELDs, because when I drove truck, I kept paper logs. I kept 3 of them because, I would be halfway down or to Florida and back before I stopped to sleep, and from Jersey or from wherever we were running out of. And I've never had a problem with e-logs. Well, here's the thing. So I own trucks leading up into COVID. I knew that COVID was going to shut down. We were running hot shots. I knew it was going to affect us negatively. It was already affecting our broker business because we were a volume broker. We didn't go out and make these huge exorbitant commissions. What we did is we'd sell a load for more money to a carrier, take less of a profit, undercutting all the other brokers that were vying for that business, because we were taking less of a profit. Therefore, we'd be awarded more profit. Like, for me, it wasn't worth it for me to book 2 loads. I had to book 10 in order to make what a normal broker makes off 2 loads. Big brokers hated, volume brokers, because the only thing I care about was moving loads. I didn't care about how much margin was on it. I had a $40 minimum. Like, I would move $2,000 loads for a $40 profit. Why? Because, for one, if I moved 10 of those loads, I made $400. Secondly, it took me 3 minutes? You know what I mean? To book a load. So I was never greedy. And that's why I was, I did things the way I did. But that volume started, cutting down. When all the lockdowns started happening, my biggest customer at that point started dropping their rates. And they got to the point, because we were over the contract rates for that time. We got to where the contract rates that we had in place with them, and because we had like a minimum that was set based on our contract, and they flat out said, fuck you guys. If you can't lower your rate to where the market is, which was dirt cheap in the middle of COVID, the rates were shit. And so we had no choice. I ended up dropping that customer instead of selling carriers cheaper loads. But that was my prerogative. Other people didn't do that. Other people would just move whatever they had. But think about it with truckers, right? So the country shut everything down. This is what a lot of people don't realize. The country shut everything down, right? So fast food restaurants were shut down. Malls were shut down. Hotels were shut. Everything was shut down. The people that were given exemptions were like media, nurses, doctors, truckers. Why? Because they were carrying all the emergency goods to everyone. Now, how can they get a load of ventilators from Idaho to Florida in the quickest amount of time that they can when they're restricted on these hours of service that they got to keep track of on their log? Well, the federal government says, and keep in mind, the whole reason ELDs were put into place was to keep drivers honest. The whole reason that the federal government monitors these truck drivers and how many hours they're driving and how many hours they're off duty and all that is because of previous accidents, of drivers falling asleep, of drivers crashing, of drivers driving high on meth across country. Those are the reasons, and causing accidents. Those are the reasons the government felt it was a necessity, that it was a life-saving necessity to effectively restrict how much a driver was allowed to drive every day, unless there was a natural emergency or a emergency declaration like COVID or a hurricane or tornado or anything else. And at that point, all the safety measures that the federal government put into place, because they can't trust truck drivers to keep their own logs, they all go out the window. For COVID, as soon as COVID hit, there was an emergency declaration that was put into place, and then the U.S. Department of Transportation and Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration put out their own under that, which said basically anyone hauling anything that's for relief efforts, which included food, grocery stores. Remember toilet paper, how there was a shortage of toilet paper? Any trucker that was hauling toilet paper was exempted. They didn't have to follow hours of service. They could drive as long as they wanted, as long as they felt safe, and they could pull over. They didn't have to worry about going to scales in some instances. They didn't have to worry about keeping their logs or doing anything, because the government deemed that because of life, health, and safety, it was more important for them to be able to get a load delivered than it was for all these regulations they put into place. That is one of the things that truckers that were involved in that People's Convoy, that's what they should have been, pointing out. Just as clean and as plain as I just put it out to all of you. They should have been like, why is it whenever there's a natural disaster or an emergency declaration that truckers are called and all the restrictions that you put on us are waived? You trust us then, but you don't trust us to do our normal job every single day? That would have been a powerful statement, because then they had national media that was talking about it. And that's why I got frustrated with the People's Convoy, because they weren't. They were going up there. They were talking about lockdowns and masks and criticizing people for wearing masks and talking about the cross-border issues and the fact that the United States border was closed for truckers and all this stuff, but they weren't talking about the actual issues in trucking and the fact that truckers were the reason why we are all here. Truckers were bringing freight while we were all locked down. Truckers were bringing freight. Truckers were delivering the food to your gas stations and the water to your grocery stores and the toilet paper to the toilet places, ventilators, medicine, all that stuff. That was all on the backs of truckers. And so they missed that opportunity because they didn't, because they didn't pay attention to it, and that was my big reservation with the People's Convoy going into it. And then when I went there and I walked around with the People's Convoy and I was embedded with them for 3 days, brought my motorhome down there and stayed with them right there in Hagerstown. And I'm listening to their speeches. And finally, after the last speech, it was supposed to be a big one. And I'm like, you have to mention trucking. At some point, you have to. It's got to happen, right? They did a whole hour-long speech and not a mention about trucking. Not a mention about any of the issues that truck drivers face. The fact that the detention rate right now, $40 an hour, $35 an hour, is the same rate it was when I started in the industry fucking 15 years ago, 16 years ago. Detention is when a truck driver gets to a pickup or a drop off, and either one, the dock's not ready, so they can't offload their freight or load, so they have to wait there, or two, well, that's pretty much it, or the time that it takes for them to get offloaded, which is a huge issue in trucking, because you could be sitting at a Walmart distribution center for 15 hours. You know what I mean? And if you're only getting $40 an hour to sit there, including your fuel, and if you're a company driver, forget it. You're probably making like $10 an hour as a stipend or whatever the hell they do for driver pay, but you're getting $40 an hour. And there's all these companies like Uber Freight. They were a great platform, right? So they come out with this technology basically to match freight from freight brokers or from shippers. They were acting as a broker to match freight, like a load of watermelon that had to go from Florida to wherever, New Hampshire. So they took that freight and they put it on a matchboard and their AI technology and all that stuff sent that load to carriers who then were able to bid on it. Uber Freight, when they first started, they came out with a great detention rate, $75 an hour. Layover is another one. Like if you have a 4:00 appointment, you get there at 3:50 and they say, we can't get you offloaded today. You're going to have to wait until tomorrow. Layover is another one. They were paying something like $400, $500, $600 for a layover in the beginning. And then they got all these carriers hooked. It's like feeding crack, right? It's like drugs, right? You give, and eventually they're just going to need it. And that's what happened with Uber Freight is they realized that they could, once they had their carrier base, they could cut the detention and say, you know what? Now we're going back to what the market rate was of $40 an hour. Layover is this. Truck order not used is when they would dispatch you. You travel 150 miles to go pick up a load and you get there and they're like, fuck that. We don't have this load for you. Or worse, they've figured out while you were driving there that you were charging too much and they give it to another carrier. This shit happens to truckers daily. It happens to truckers daily. They'll go and sit at a Walmart distribution center. I used to love doing that because I just bring a tablet and watch Netflix. But other people hated it, right? Because you'd sit there, and I was the company owner, so I didn't care. I built my detention rate into it. It's like conventions. Everyone hated going to the Javits Center in New York City. I would sit at the Javits Center for 18, 19 hours because I'm getting paid $100 an hour to sit there because I own the company. It was different. But detention rate is so common now. It's or the detention at a shipper. I mean, according to Atri, what was it? I think it was on this list. Yeah, it's number 4. It's number 4 for carriers. Detention delay at customer facilities. And this got worse with COVID because think about COVID. The media and everybody prepped it up so everyone was fucking afraid to work. So when they finally did start opening up all these distribution centers and all these facilities for truckers to go and get loads, what was happening is there was one chicken plant that, and I forgot where it was, Atlanta or in Georgia, I believe, where truckers were waiting for days to get offloaded because they didn't have any employees there. You know, they didn't have any employees because all the employees were sick. They tested positive. They had to be sent home. Or you had like Smith, or what was the hog place? Was that Smithfield Foods that ended up having to close down for several weeks and they had to slaughter thousands of pigs? Many of them were on the back of the livestock haulers. That's what really happened in the trucking industry. You don't see that shit on the news. You don't see it. Here's another one you don't see on the news. This is freaking insane. This is insane. Apparently this just happened at a Walmart in Colorado, and this is all alleged, but he has a trespass. Listen.
Well, I got trespassed from Walmart in Loveland, Colorado this morning.
He got trespassed while making a delivery because he showed up a half an hour early. And then he has a video later on where he was at a Love's nearby waiting for, to figure out what he's going to do with his load. And another driver came and said, I just got trespassed as well. And that driver made a really good point because he's like, listen, I was a few minutes late to my appointment. They said they're not going to offload me. I'm talking nice to them. They want me to come back and all this stuff. And I should have made my appointment. And he's getting yelled at. And he's like, I am not going to kill myself over this job. I am not going to drive when I'm tired. I'm not. And that's the thing is drivers don't get any attention. They go into distribution centers like that. What do? They get trespassed. Or now there's a rise in crime. Truckers are getting shot and robbed and shit in truck stops. That's happening all over the place. And nobody cares. And you'll hear all these people that'll talk about trucking this, trucking that. Everyone's like, oh, thank a trucker. But nobody actually pays attention to just how much that job sucks. You want to solve the driver shortage issue, which is a myth. Make trucking what it's supposed to be. Pay the drivers what they're supposed to get. But here's another example. Okay, here's a more recent one because that was recent too. But here's another recent one. Remember that big record-breaking blizzard in New York State where they got 70 inches of snow? Well, they do what they always do when there's a big blizzard, and they close the roadways to commercial traffic. And then eventually they closed it to all traffic, but initially it was commercial traffic. Here's another issue in trucking that everybody seems not to give a fuck about, right? Because you care about trucks, You care about seeing them on the road and getting your toilet paper delivered to you, but you don't care where those drivers sleep at night, do you? And I'm not saying you in general. I'm generalizing, everything, because people don't. There's a huge truck driver shortage. There's an estimated 300,000 truck parking spots across the United States. Guess how many trucks there are? Like 10 times that. Like 10 times that. So when they shut down all these roadways in Buffalo and Rochester and all those areas there, they shut them all down to commercial traffic. There were a total of 13 truck stops in that whole vicinity, all the way from Rochester to the town south of Buffalo. I forgot what it was. Big town. That whole area, 13 total truck stops, totaling 469 parking spaces. I checked. There weren't enough parking spots for the trucks. The trucks had to park somewhere, right? So they pulled over. It wasn't safe for them to drive anymore. What are they supposed to do? They pull over on the side of the road, and then guess what happens? All these cops, the state police, and all these motor traffic police officers pull behind them and give them tickets under the governor's order. Give them 25. It's estimated that the tickets are each worth $2,500. They give them tickets. Can you believe this? They give them all tickets for $2,500. In total, they ticketed 414 trucks, commercial motor vehicles. That's over $1 million in fines for truck drivers that were bringing freight to point A to point B. People don't care about the trucks. People don't care about the trucking industry. And unfortunately, there's nothing going to do. There's nothing going to do. Someone said, Steve, if you saw the whole interview, he was 2.5 hours early. He threatened to dump his load in the parking lot. He was complaining about being out of hours, but he was out when he got to the gate. Yeah, I mean, I listened to it. I know he even said he was being an asshole, but it's still. And here's the thing. When a truck driver runs out of hours, for that expression, even if he pulls up to the gate and he's out of hours, if he pulls up to a gate and he's out of hours, he can't move. And so what did they do? And yeah, do I think that the trucker was probably mouthing off and there's probably more to that story? Yes, but that happens all the time. That extreme, wasn't there truck drivers that were like beaten? I think it was last year. They were beaten while pulling into a facility. Security guard came out and viciously beat the truck driver because of a dispute. That shit happens all the time. That shit happens all the time at these facilities. And you got all these warehousemen. Granted, their job sucks too, but you got all these there's so many issues in trucking, from lumper pay to everything. And until the trucking industry can actually come together and until the mega fleets actually realize that these small trucks are part of the reason why they're so successful, nothing's gonna happen. Nothing's gonna happen. Someone said, hence the trespass makes sense to me. Someone said, but Steve, if they pay them to do what they should and more people go back into trucking, prices might go down for a bit and help alleviate supply and, God forbid, some price issues. That's not what our elites want. What? Prices might go down a bit. How much lower can prices get? We broke down, like, for example, in 2019, the average cost to operate a commercial fleet truck, that's a commercial fleet. That means they're getting huge discounts on their truck purchasing, so the truck notes, huge discounts on the insurance, huge discounts on driver pay even, huge discounts on maintenance because they're working on them as fleets, big fleets. In fact, most are doing it themselves. The national average when fuel was at $3.20, $3.40 a gallon was $1.87 a mile. $1.87 a mile. If the national average right now is sitting just above $2 a mile, but fuel is nearly $2 a mile more, or $2 more, how can you have rates lower than what they were back then? You can't. It's not sustainable. It's not sustainable. And that's why everybody is going to, that's why this industry is going to go crazy. Bree Dixon said, Jeff, did you hear why Steve wasn't totally for the convoy? See, you're confusing two different things, Bree. The 1776 movement was not the People's Convoy. They're two different things. Two different things. But Someone said, I think I remember Brian saying that he wasn't addressing the issue Steve is talking about with the convoy, but would at a later date. Yeah, what? And now what is he? He's a big he quit trucking, quit advocating for trucking, and now he's getting, paid to go speak at all these COVID events with lockdowns and all that stuff, talking about lockdowns. But he didn't even talk about how COVID affected truck drivers. How when they locked down all the restaurants and they locked down all this shit, truckers couldn't find food anywhere. Truckers were literally walking up to drive-thrus to be told they couldn't order any food. Truckers were getting trespassed from fast food restaurants down south because they wouldn't leave. They're like, we're fucking starving. We need food. Having police called on them. There's one story where a police officer, the restaurant wasn't allowed to serve people walk up through the window, even though it was in the middle of a pandemic. So a police officer literally sat in his car as lines of trucks came next to him, and he ordered for him and passed the food to the truck drivers. No joke. Those are real stories. Everybody forgets about the truck drivers with COVID. How come that story wasn't relayed off with the People's Convoy? And that's the thing that pisses me off. And that's why I didn't support the People's Convoy fully, because of that. Someone said, I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but you got to know your hours. And if you can't do that, then take some personal responsibility. Look up the whole interview on Mother Trucker on YouTube. Yeah, I watched part of it. And it doesn't even matter, because here's the thing. If you have a 4 o'clock appointment, you run out of hours at your delivery, you should be able to deliver, right? It doesn't matter if he's 2.5 hours early. He had nowhere to go. You know what I mean? And I didn't watch the whole Mother Trucker interview because, frankly, I don't like the way they talk back and forth on when they do the interviews. But here's the thing, and that's just one example that I gave. You can try to justify the fact that a trucker got a no trespass or a trespass from a Walmart distribution center. And do I think there is more? Like, yeah, he's like, oh, they said I hit him. And then you had the other guy that was kicked out, the black dude that was at the Loves and said he just got a trespass as well. And he was like, I was being nice. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't curse. I didn't do anything. And I still got a trespass. And he was like, I was late for my appointment. I'll be honest. I've gotten to Walmart distribution centers after my appointment, and they're either like, one, we'll work you in, or two, you got to go reschedule. And I've wasted a whole trip because with Retail Link, which is the software Walmart uses for their distribution center, you can't get another appointment. That's why we ended up building a distribution program to consolidate LTL loads to go to those facilities, and came up with a drop trailer arrangement for Walmart because we were just missing all the damn appointments. We were an LTL regional carrier. We couldn't make the appointments. So we ended up dropping trailers. We worked out an agreement with Walmart. I used to run up to Raymond, New Hampshire. What's the one? Pittsfield, Pennsylvania. I used to run up there a lot. And we dropped trailers there all the time because the distribution centers were so bad. As long as we delivered within that window, they didn't care. But that's the thing, man. Someone said, I heard large companies are telling new drivers to park and sleep in the fuel island. Well, that's because there's no parking. That's because there's no parking. There's not enough truck parking. And that's why truck parking is the number one issue when they surveyed actual drivers, including owner operators. The number two issue for drivers, including owner operators, was fuel prices. You got to take that into consideration. When you look at that, the number one issue to truckers on the road is not fuel. It's the fact that they don't have anywhere to stop and sleep. They don't have anywhere to stop and sleep. That's got to just be like crazy to you, right? And then you have facilities like, granted, this was in Canada, but there was one business that opened it up and allowed trucks to park on their property. You know, they didn't allow them to park long term. They allowed them to park overnight. It was a big, farm or some shit like that. But they allowed trucks to park on there, and it became like a truck stop. They had no services, nothing, but they would allow the trucks to park there every single night. They didn't charge for it or anything. They got fined tens of thousands of dollars for allowing trucks to park there. Which is funny because Florida last year was working on all this truck parking legislation. They kept putting it up. They were doing raids. The Florida Department of Environment was doing raids on truck parking locations that were running illegal truck stops where essentially trucks were parking and spending the night there. And so they did raids. And when I say raids, I'm talking about raids. Dozens of police officers raiding in and towing vehicles and doing all that shit. And that happened numerous places in Florida. It happens all over the place. It's absolutely crazy. I always hated going to Florida because you would go all the way down into Miami and try to make a delivery, and you couldn't even get a parking spot. You couldn't get anything in Miami at all. You would have to come all the way back up by like Fort Pierce in order to get to like a truck parking location. It was crazy. It was crazy, but that's just trucking, man. And unfortunately it's not gonna do anything. Someone said, I get what you're saying, Steve. I stopped delivering there when I knew their rules. It sucks, but if you play or it sucks, but you play or you don't deliver there. No, that's true. I mean, and that's the thing with Walmart distribution centers. They're notoriously bad, because they're so strict. And when you set the appointment, because here's the thing, Walmart has, or at least they used to when we built the consolidation program, when they had like basically, if you sell a product at Walmart, you need to maintain an on-time ratio that is greater than like 97%, right? And if you didn't get, your on-time, meaning your deliveries actually made it. So what they do is they give you a 10-day. So they place the order and then you essentially have 10 days to get the freight there, right? Into the Walmart distribution centers where they put it on Walmart trucks and they ship it out. So basically what they do is they give you 10 days and then you get a must deliver by date and then 3 days before that. So you essentially have 4 days to schedule your appointment to deliver the freight to that facility. And what happens if you miss an appointment, Walmart is notorious for making you reschedule the appointment. And sometimes they won't give you another appointment because you have to do it through their software retail link. If they won't give you an appointment till after that must deliver by date. So if you have a customer from a brokerage perspective, let me talk from a broker perspective. If you have a customer that is shipping to all, 48, there used to be 48 distribution centers when I was doing the consolidation program. I don't know how many there are now, but if you had a customer that was shipping out LTLs to all those different facilities and you missed the appointments on those, think about it. If you have to have a 97% on-time ratio, otherwise they get fined. And when I say fined, and here's the thing, Walmart gets their money because they pay the invoice for the product that they're purchasing, but they will take out any late deliver fees or anything like that, on-time fees. They will take those all out of the final settlement. I had a customer that happened to. Customer dropped us like hotcakes because the company I was working for at that time as their sales director, we helped build this program. That company didn't give a fuck about on-time ratio. They only cared about putting as much freight as they could on the truck, on the trailer, and delivering it and dropping it within, and it didn't matter if one customer was a smaller customer, so they only had one pallet versus, a bigger customer that has 10 pallets going to each distribution center. So that customer called me one day. I mean, this is how I, went off on my own. That customer, and I brought in that customer, like it was a big multi-million-dollar customer. That customer called me on my own and said, listen, I'm done. I can't work anymore. We're getting fined out the ass from Walmart. Will you work? And I said, what do I have to do to keep the business? And they said, well, you can't work there anymore. And so I quit that day. I signed an agreement with another freight broker, and I just became an independent agent moving freight and making way more money because now I was actually getting, a decent commission on it. But yeah. Someone said, Ken said, a lot more about brokering. Why is it that loads pay great going into Florida, but to get a decent rate, you have to deadhead out of state? It's because again, when you have all the carriers going in, when you have a flood, when the market is flooded, right? So you have 10 carriers for every load. The carriers and the shippers can underbid the freight. They could say, well, we're not paying you $3 a mile going out because we have another carrier that'll do it for $1. And no matter what, there's always going to be a carrier that does it for cheaper. That's just how it is. But then you'll have like reefer outbound when the produce market's going, where you'll have it switches. So you'll have freight that's paying $3 or $4 or $5 a mile coming out of Florida, but then going in, you're better off just deadheading if you have freight coming out. It's and the same thing is with California. I tell you, the other day I was surprised because I ran rates. I haven't looked at rates. I haven't looked at anything in like a year and a half. I looked at rates from California to Jersey and Jersey to California, and I was startled because normally one of those rates will be higher, right? So normally one of those rates, like California to Jersey, will be like $2.50 a mile, and the Jersey to California will be like $1.10 or $1.20 a mile. Right now, they're both sitting at like $1.50. That's bad. That tells you that there's not enough. There's way too much capacity out there. What happens when you add more trucks? The capacity grows. Therefore, the demand for those trucks is null. There isn't one because they can, for every load, they got 100 trucks. for example, I had a trucking company in Florida. We had when we, when our trucks came back, for the weekend or whatever, when we pull our trucks back, they would come in and then they deadhead up to Georgia. And we were in South Florida because even me, knowing the brokerage industry, I couldn't get customers that were paying over, for flatbed freight flatbed was kind of, but I'd have to run them 200 miles to Tampa or 110 miles, whatever. I'd have to run them to Tampa and then they'd sit for 5 or 6 hours. It just made more sense to have them deadhead up to Georgia and pick up a load out of there. That's what a lot of carriers do. It's just easier. I bet that's why those truckers were trespassed, not for behaviors early, late. Walmart needs the fine money. Yeah, I don't know if they need the fine money because here's what happens after that, right? So if your on-time ratio goes below 97%, you get fined. And don't hold me to any of these numbers. It could have changed by now. But if you drop below 94, they stop selling your product. So that happens very fast. That happens very fast. So if you start getting fined a lot as a supplier to Walmart, there's a very little chance that you're going to be able to sustain that business with them, those contracts, unless you fire your transportation provider. So, I mean, it is what it is. But does that answer your question about Florida in terms of freight? God, you know what's funny is when I did this as Freight Broker Live like 2 years ago, like I would have like 50 viewers across all platforms, like 50. Like to me, this is the coolest fucking thing ever because I'm talking about freight, something I like. I have a bunch of people that, 284 people across all the social media channels that are paying attention to what I'm talking about. Some may, work in the industry. Others may have no idea about the industry whatsoever. And to me, it's cool to have that many people listen. And that's why I'm going to start talking about freight a lot more. I think I'm going to do Trucking Tuesdays and that's it. I'm only going to talk about the trucking industry on Tuesdays, maybe Trucking Tuesdays and Thursdays. And then we'll talk about politics and shit all the other nights. Because for one, I like doing it, like it's been almost an hour right now and I'm energized. I love talking about this stuff. Someone said I had a 6-foot drop overnight in Truckee, California. Food was short at Safeway and we had stored food in the cabin, but the local plower was good to keep the roads. I guess you're talking about snow, but someone said you had no clue. Well, and see, that's one of the reasons is I like that people that don't necessarily know about the trucking industry care, are here listening. You know what I mean? Because it is still news. It is still news, especially with all this talk now. They're all talking about freight or the railways that are going to shut down and blah, blah, blah. And that, I mean, if they shut down, it's going to cost $2 billion a day. Even CNN ran an article and it's like, no, the potential strike on the railways won't affect your holidays. But here is how it'll affect you. It's like, oh, it won't affect you in this way, but you're going to be fucked in this way. And to be honest, if the railway shut down, yeah, it's going to affect everybody. It'll be good for the trucking market. Do you know what I mean? It'll be good because rates are going to go. You're going to have a shit ton of expedited freight. You're going to have a shit ton of expedited freight all the time. Someone said, I'm not tracking on the freight convo, but you said flatbread instead of flatbed earlier. Really? That's funny. Someone said, where's your CB radio? Where's the truck driver callers? Well, I'm in an office, so clearly there's no CB here. Someone said you have 5 CB radios. I was looking at a CB the other day. It's a hybrid. So it's a police scanner as well. And it automatically tracks with like a SIM card based on your geolocation. And because I wanted one anyway, just for all the different calls and media, like there was a fire last night and I almost went. And then I remembered that the big camera, which was back there yesterday, is now in the gym section. I remembered I didn't have it, so I didn't go. But it was a big fire, single, double, 2-floor house, whatever. What the fuck? Single family, 2-floor single family. Isn't the union railroad workers who want to strike again not the non-union? Am I correct when I say that we need to worry when non-union workers strike? Yeah, but I think it's 2 of the 5 unions have voted to strike, but all the other three or two of the five major unions have voted to, well, I don't know if they voted to strike. They voted not to, well, yeah, they must have. And then the other three agreed with the proposition, a 25% pay raise and all the other shit that was introduced to them. But they said that if the other two unions do strike, they will strike in solidarity. So one of my YouTube mods, I got the bot person in the chat. Can you ban them? Yeah. So you guys want to know more about this? Here, I'll tell you, because I don't know that much about this because I haven't been paying attention. American consumers in nearly every U.S. industry will be affected if freight trains grind to a halt next month. One of the biggest rail unions rejected a deal on Monday, joining three others that have failed to approve the contracts over concerns of demanding schedules and the lack of paid sick time. That raises the risk of a strike, which could start as soon as December 9th. Jeez, I can't talk. It's getting late. Under a deadline that was pushed back Tuesday. It wouldn't take long to feel the effects of a rail strike trickle through the economy. Many businesses would only have a few days worth of raw materials and space for finished goods. Makers of food, fuel, cars, and chemicals would all feel the squeeze, as would their customers. United States Secretary of Department of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, said the Biden administration's goal is to make sure the strike doesn't happen, saying we've got to get to a solution that does not subject the American economy to the threat of a shutdown. We don't have enough trucks or barges or ships in the country to make the rail network, which he's right about that. But then again, this is the problem when you appoint people that have no business in transportation running the United States Secretary of or running the Department of Transportation. Pete Buttigieg has no experience in transportation whatsoever. He shouldn't be, in charge of it. And then you have the other one. What was it? Misha Joshi. I don't believe she's there anymore. She was in charge. She ran like Uber shit for New York City, and they put her in charge of the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. And then she bailed. And the woman that's in charge of the Federal Highway Administration, she's the one that was the failed, person from Massachusetts that never canceled out the 6,000, suspended driver's licenses. And there's lawsuits and people died and all that stuff. It's just crazy. The dependence on the already suffering rail system would be tested, especially after other circumstances affecting the supply chain, like the Mississippi River drought affecting much of the Midwest. About 60% of the Midwest and northern Great Plains states are in a drought. Nearly the entire stretch of the Mississippi River from Minnesota to the river mouth in Louisiana experienced below average rainfall for months leading into November, which is pretty crazy. While the barge crews, the Coast Guard, and everybody has done a phenomenal job of dredging the rivers, making sure they continue to float boats, the efficiency has been down tremendously, said Josh Linville, Vice President of Fertilizer for StoneX Financial. He said a rail strike is still going to be tremendously devastating to our agricultural system. We're finishing a harvest in 2022. So now all of a sudden that we need to move these grains south, we need to move them internationally. Without rail, we can't do that, he says. The stakes are so high for the U.S. economy that Congress is expected to intervene and impose contract terms on railroad workers. The last time U.S. railroads went on strike was in 1992. That strike lasted 2 days before Congress intervened. Here are some of the expected impacts of the rail strike. $2 billion a day in capital letters. Railroads haul about 40% of the nation's freight each year. Railroads are estimated that a rail strike would cost the economy $2 billion a day in a report issued earlier this fall. But that number is probably incorrect too, because inflation wasn't even what it was back then. Now it's even higher. Another recent report put together by the Chemical Industry Trade Group projected that strike drags on for a month. Some 700,000 jobs would be lost as manufacturers who rely on railroads shut down. Prices of nearly everything increase and even more, and the economy is potentially thrust into a recession, even though we're already in a recession. No one wants to admit it. And then it just keeps talking about all this shit. This is, and I literally tried to find like a neutral news article to reference here. And it's hard because everyone is, crazy. You know what I mean? But I don't know. I think I'm going to go home and just relax for the rest of the night, whatever time it is. It's 9:30, so the night's over. My whole family's probably asleep. But I wanted to talk about the trucking side because there's a lot going on in the trucking industry, and everybody hears about trucking, but nobody actually pays attention to it. And so I'm going to try to talk about trucking as much as I can, as much as I can tolerate, as much as you guys can. Also, when we cover the congressional hearings and stuff during the week, it's no longer going to be on this main YouTube channel, nor is it going to be on the Facebook channel under my name, Steve Oatley. It's not going to be on either of those channels. It'll be on Citizen Stringer TV and Citizen Stringer Facebook, because we're having a problem with, I got to beat this algorithm somehow and increase the revenue that we get from doing the live streams. And I think it's just because we're doing too many different things all the time, and it's screwing up our viewership. You know what I mean? So I'm just going to try to fix it. And instead of doing like one show one day, you know, in one channel, just every night, this will be on all the channels. And then when we do the congressional hearings or anything else, it'll just be on the, Citizen Stringer TV channels, because I think it's a lot easier for people to figure it out. And then, and I'm going to start doing, shorter videos on this main channel, just one live stream a day, plus a bunch of shorter videos throughout the day. What happened to the driver shortage? It still is. Still, or the diesel shortage. We still have a shortage. What are they saying? We had 10 days supply. I don't know if that's the latest estimate. I have no idea. Someone said, I thought you got rid of CSTV. No, I did. But I'm talking about the YouTube channel and Facebook page, Citizen Stringer TV, both of those. I'm going to keep it more news on those two channels, and on these, it's just going to be anything. Like, for example, like the Facebook page, if you follow us on the Facebook page, that's going to just have a lot more. I'm going to start like blogging on the Angry Turnip page, and I'm going to share those articles out. The news articles will stop being on that page, probably starting on Monday, just because I've looked at the analytics, and we're not getting the reach because we're just getting inundated with stuff. So I want people to not, like the weightlifting shit. I did 2 or 3 of those, and people aren't into it. So I'll just weightlift and I won't live stream and talk about politics. Do you know what I mean? I'll just do it on my own. That's why I have a whole gym here. So, and maybe every now and then I'll put up a YouTube short or something, but I'm just going to try to, get these platforms big. So that way I don't need to like push, like everyone should go to the Angry Turnip and buy a t-shirt so we could afford to buy Christmas presents, like shit like that. So I don't have to do that. But but that's going to be it, guys. I appreciate everyone for watching. Please make sure if you're watching on YouTube, you like this channel, hit the bell, you'll get notifications. Every Tuesday and Thursday, it'll be, Trucking Tuesday or Trucking Thursday, where we just talk about the trucking industry. I'll try to get other drivers to come on the show and talk about the industry, freight brokers, shit like that. That'll be a more produced show, kind of like Freight Broker Live used to be. It'll be a little bit like that. But at any rate, I probably won't be live tomorrow. I was hoping that I'd make some money tonight. It's not happening. So, but I am going to spend tomorrow with my family and do some stuff. I'll be in here working all day though tomorrow, but then tomorrow night, I'm just going to relax. That's when the Tulsa King is back on, and then Yellowstone. So obviously I'm not going to be here, but I appreciate all you guys for watching. We'll see you next time.